So if you can use your chat in the bottom corner there to share where you're dialing in from today. It'd be great just to see where people are in the world. And as you probably gathered from that little message just then, we are going to be recording today's session. For those people that can't join us live. So yeah, just so you're aware, we're going to be recording the session and it will be used on our website at a later date so people can access the conversation. Great to see everybody using that chat. Got a real spectrum of people dialing in from different areas in the UK. Also got some people being a bit more international. Norway, Dubai, that's fantastic. Great to have everybody here. Welcome very much to the event. So like I say, this is our Constructive Conversations event, and my name's Kerry, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this event. This is part of a series that we're running where we're going to be looking at our principles of global responsibility. And this is the second session where we're going to be looking at our Purposeful principle. Now, it's our intention with these events to provide a space to discuss and challenge, listen to some of the most pressing issues that we need to interrogate to put global responsibility at the heart of engineering. And currently within the UK, our sector, the engineering sector, employs about 5.7 million people. And there is a lack of clarity around that kind of commitment that we need to make within the profession with people and planet, that commitment to people and the commitment to our planet. We have things like the professional institutes that have, individual codes of conducts. We have ethical principles, statements of ethical principles, but to enable a better world, the professional commitment should also be taking into account those commitments to the people and to our planet, the kind of commitments and the actions that we can take to embed this into our day-to-day. And as the IPCC report that was released just a couple of weeks ago showed us, there are some real pressing issues that we need to address. And we've got COP26 just around the corner that we'll be kind of discussing them in a lot more depth. And we've also got the decade of action that we're now in to the 2030 deadlines to our sustainable development goals. And so this really is now the time for the engineering community to be proactively considering how we can address the kind of destruction of our global ecosystems, how we as a profession can kind of really contribute to solving these issues, these challenges. And to achieve this social and environmental justice that we need those working within the engineering community to commit to global responsibility. And here at Engineers Without Borders UK, we launched a strategy. It's our strategy that takes us to 2030. And as part of this, we've outlined 4 key principles to global responsibility within engineering. And we want these to be adopted across the engineering community, embedded into the culture, embedded into how we teach engineering, how we practice engineering. And like I say, during our conversation today, we'll be unpacking one of these principles, and that is the purposeful one. Now let's just have a little look at what the other principles are to remind ourselves. So our first one is responsible. And this is to meet the needs of everyone within the limits of our planet. And this needs to be at the heart of our engineering. Our second one, so the one we're going to be interrogating today, is purposeful. To consider all the influence on the impacts of our engineering. This is looking at the project and the product's inception to its end of its life. So what are the impacts of the engineering? This should also be at a global and local scale for people on planet. So what are those impacts that we have from the entire life cycle of our engineering, both on the local environment and the global environment? Our third one is inclusive, to ensure that a diverse viewpoints and knowledge are heard, included and respected in the engineering process. And our fourth and final one is regenerative, to actively restore and regenerate ecological systems rather than just reducing impact. So those third and fourth ones, inclusive and regenerative, we'll be discussing at a later date in a session similar to this. So our purposeful one, like I said, this is to consider those impacts, consider the impacts of your engineering from that inception of an engineering life cycle right down to its end, considering those at different scales. And within this principle, we've also added some example actions that we're suggesting that individuals can take to start embedding this into your day-to-day. So the first step we're encouraging people to do is to identify how your engineering activities are contributing to the achievement of UN SDGs. How can you maximize this? And we're going to be discussing this in a lot more depth today to really unpack what does that mean in practice. And our second one is to scrutinize the local and global impact of your projects that you're currently involved in, but also to challenge the objectives, to challenge the reason behind your projects. How can these be more globally responsible if they're not already? Now, to help us unpack this, to help us talk about this purposeful principle, we have three panelists with us today. So it's my pleasure to introduce them to the call. First up, we've got Christian. Christian is the head of sustainability at Watson Marlow Fluid Technology Group, and he sees the purpose of his role is to contribute to a better world now and to the future, to create the environments where everyone can thrive, where we create a culture of purpose, where teams are valued and ultimately become an unstoppable force for good. On the call, we've also got Bobby. Bobby is a professor of management and associate dean of research and enterprise at Bayes Business School and City of University London. Now, Bobby researches and teaches on corporate social responsibility, sustainability, climate change, and he's also widely published in different journals, but also different books, including Corporate Social Responsibility, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I'm sure you've got a lot to say in this space. And finally, we have Wendy. Wendy's on the call. Wendy is a chartered civil engineer with 25 years experience in the waste industry. Wendy has in-depth knowledge of all aspects of engineering, including the circular economy. Her responsibilities have included leading a business development and growth, capital and operational expenditure, as well as procurement and recruitment. She founded the Way Forward 2045 in July 2020, which has a focus on supporting the transition of low carbon, people-focused solutions, and she's also an enterprise fellow in the Hunter Centre at Strathclyde Business School. And so it's a pleasure to welcome you all here. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see you. There we go, fantastic. Great, welcome everybody. So, like I said, we're going to be unpacking this principle together. So I guess the first kind of big question for you all is, I talked a lot about one of these parts of this principle is really kind of measuring the impact that we're having. How can we go about measuring the impacts of things that we're involved in, both at those kind of positive and negative impacts? Anybody have any thoughts to start us off? Wendy, go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. So, as you said, I'm a chartered civil engineer, and I have worked within the waste sort of environment, but I'm very, very passionate about how we can develop ecosystems, and particularly using the natural capital to develop the clustering of engineering and infrastructure within there. So I took on a project last year, which as a private client with a company called National Pride, it's a new startup, and the ethos behind that organisation is about developing eco-wellness tourism opportunities that are free at the point of service for the local communities they're built in, and starting to look at how we can engage sort of a service level agreement with the NHS around step up, step down transitions, about mental well-being, about partnering and working alongside the NHS with regards to how we can include those services at the point of purpose. So when I was asked to discuss this and put forward sort of my pitch, if you like, to actually work with these people after speaking to them for several months, I had insisted on having a conversation with the investors, because the two people I'd met, Andy and Irene, really strong ethical values. They knew what they wanted to achieve. They had a very strong vision and purpose around their business idea. But what they'd done is spent 3 years identifying various investors from across the globe. And they had basically introduced and interviewed and interrogated the investors in order to find the ones who were willing to look at buying land, real estate, and the opportunity to stay with those developments beyond planning, and the importance of that financial journey, which kept them involved with regards to the purpose and the community benefits. So as part of the process for me staying with that company, I had said that I'd like to speak to the investor as well. So they made sure he was part of the pitching panel. So it was very clear at day one that with the development ideas that I was taking forward, that he would know quite clearly where I saw the vision of his organisation and that I could work autonomously. But it was very much right back, follow the money. Where is the money coming from? Where is the ethics and the morals behind the money? And how can, if it's not necessarily meeting the requirements of the UN 17 Sustainable Goals, how could I influence the decisions to allow them some scope to change and accommodate and be agile within that space?
Yeah, I think, Wendy, fantastic. Actually, wonderful to hear you say, for me, the three cornerstones, great vision, something slightly out of reach, something to aspire to, values. I mean, they're basically what we build and we work within, and then knowing your purpose. Because I think nowadays, where we're at, so many people think they have a purpose, but do they truly understand their purpose? When we talk about this thing about purposefulness, and, for me, purpose is central. If you don't truly understand your purpose and use that as a benchmark, how can you really have that kind of constructive, positive dialogue that leads to impact? So talking about how do you start this, I think, Wendy, you just picked up perfectly. Understand your vision, know your values, know your purpose.
Might throw a bit of a spanner in the works here, because I'm not an engineer, so I would love to hear and engineering is such a broad church, it's really a broad community, but I would love to hear the specifics of how the engineering community, whether it's construction or manufacturing, are looking concretely at SDG, because I'm thinking to myself, one branch of engineering is petroleum engineering. So what would a responsible and purposeful Shell or Chevron look like? They would cease to exist. So what would it take for a purposeful oil company to keep the oil under the ground and not drill for oil? And that's where I think the limits, yes, there's a lot of investor pressure in the oil companies, especially in the last 5-6 years. But sadly, the research has shown that most investors there don't really care across the board. So yes, BlackRock will issue a statement saying we're going to channel all our funding into people who have a purpose. But then if you look at where the money is actually going, they still have 1/3 of the investment in fossil fuel industries. So the real issue is then, if there is a purpose, how do we make that purpose accountable, right? What are the punitive measures when that purpose is not reached? And lastly, and most importantly, is if the purpose is only voluntary, what are the limits? How do we regulate such a purpose?
I think that's a great point, Bobby, and I think that's where we need to see greater governance. I think what we're missing at the moment is that clarity at a governmental level. We see in the UK anyway, we see quite a lot of hypocrisy at the moment from the messaging we get. Hopefully from COP26, we'll see greater clarity. And I think also we've got to have the dialogue. I mean, for me, like you were saying, these are industries that are set in the economy. And if we're going to rewire the economy effectively, we need to be part of that dialogue to understand how we transition away from fossil fuel. And I think that as an industry, as engineers, that's something we all need to kind of, proactively seek how these transition plans are going to be put in place, the governance structures, but most importantly, how we can support those industries. That's the thing to me. It's not It's not an exclusive club. It's not their problem, theirs alone. It's how we can all work as a community to help organizations and businesses that do need to change, transition in a responsible manner.
I think, oh, sorry.
Point. So I was just going to say, if there is anybody on the call that is in this industry or has experience in this industry, please do add your thoughts into the chat and your experiences of trying to do this as well in your workplace. It'd be great to hear your thoughts as we can have this conversation. Yeah, sorry, I've interrupted someone.
No worries. I was just going to add that somewhere where regulation has kind of started to make a change is the kind of the plane industry, like like with different airlines such as British Airways, that kind of almost cornered into having to look for ways to, at the very least, offset their carbon footprint, and for shorter haul flights look into how electric planes can be used for those rather than using kerosene and other fuel types.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the UK has really missed the trick here. COVID provided an ideal opportunity for us to sit back and completely redesign, and not have more of the same. The problem is we want to go back to normal. Normal is the problem in the first place. So that is the fundamental issue. So yes, while the UK government tried to put in some legislation for BA, I think the EU, especially France and Germany, went a lot further. So the French government, in bailing out Air France, said, yes, we will bail you out, but no short flights. If there is a train which reaches from A to B in 5 hours, no flights. That's it. Right? So all these bailouts, I think we've given. I mean, we are bailing out the fossil fuel industry, for crying out loud. In CO, 15% of the money for COVID has gone to the fossil fuel industry. What kind of message are we sending? Why do these people need to be bailed out at all in the first place? So I think, yes, it gave us a wonderful opportunity to ask us what kind of industry should exist, and what would be the repercussions and shocks of that industry, either going out of business or working in a very streamlined way, as you said, through offsetting emissions, which is part of the solution, or looking at other ways of travel. But I think COVID did give us an excellent opportunity, and sadly, I think the UK missed the boat.
May I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Hello. Oh,
Yeah.
Hi. Yes, sorry, I'll try and work out how to use my...
Oh, you just muted yourself, I think, Brendan.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't found the video button yet. But my name's Bernard, so I'll be quick. Thank you. Fascinating comment by the previous speaker just now. I absolutely agree that government policies need to move societies from absolutely not what we did before. And I like the electric plane argument. Actually, I think we all know it in our hearts that electric cars are not the solution, arguably not even hydrogen cars, because cars are still cars. And therefore society needs to move to what travel do we need? Don't travel. And I love this. I wish it was my phrase. It isn't. And there are other versions. That somebody said that the car metaphor is building society that's on stilts, and everything is hard to reach, and the car is the stilt. But we need to have everything at ground level. Another one is the 20th century talked about mobility, which is faster, further. But actually, the 21st century needs to talk about accessibility. Yeah. So rather than an out-of-town shopping precinct and an Odeon cinema that's huge and has 3,000 seats, I need a little Odeon cinema in my village that has 10 seats. I need a little Costa Coffee in my village that has 2 tables. And COVID taught us that just walking around the block and looking at the bugs and the snails and the flowers, and that really, really, so private car ownership needs to go. You should just borrow a car when you need one. Cars should be like aircraft, whereby if they're not moving, they're inefficient. So every aircraft model, if the aircraft isn't in the air, it's inefficient. Well, look at all the cars around us that are parked. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent point, but I'm glad you brought up the question of electric cars. As you said, electric cars is not going to save the planet, because we're talking about sustainability in the supply chain. At the end of the day, the supply chain for a Tesla is a 10-year-old kid in the Congo digging cobalt out of a mountain from a pickaxe. That's what powers those cars. You will not see that kid's photograph in the CSR reports.
So this is, I think, a really important point, Bobby, because it's about scrutinizing, like I said earlier, from that kind of conception to end of life. How are we considering the whole impact? Wendy, I saw your hand go up there. Have you got some thoughts to add?
Yeah, excellent question, and I'm not skilled enough. I have an opinion on the sort of electric car and etc. etc. And I think the word for me is transition, and I agree entirely with what Bobby said. I think the UK completely missed a trick with regards to the transition over the last 10 years. But we have to all start somewhere. So one of the projects I'm working on is Global Mushroom Company. Now, it might be a bit random, but there's a wastewater challenge with this company, which is how I've got involved with the engineering aspect. And a bit like what Bobby said earlier about the UN 17 Sustainable Goals, I went in with a view to say, we have to approach this from this more higher level, holistic level, because what the client was not necessarily wanting to talk about was exactly the same thing that the oil and gas didn't want to talk about a while ago, that for every 350 tons of mushrooms that you produce, you use 100 tons of peat, fresh as dug peat that's removing from the carbon, the carbon sequestration. So the actual carbon footprint of producing mushrooms is probably greater than producing milk, which completely goes against that whole theory around the milk and the dairy industry. But what you have to do, I believe, is exactly what Bernard just said. It's looking at those 15 and 20-minute neighbourhoods. How does your ecosystem work within that ecosystem? And then when you have to go beyond that, how do we start to connect more authentically globally? Because I think that what we've managed to achieve in COVID is a greater accessibility to other international cultures and markets and processes.
Thanks, Wendy. I think... Oh, if you got a question?
Oh, sorry, the one as well, I'll just throw this in. I think we all know that the Victorians invented the water closet because they needed to clear out London and the sewers. But actually, and I think we all know this as well, is that, of course, the compost loo is much better for the environment because, apart from the physicality of moving the solids, because you don't then dilute everything and spread it to a wide area, it stays in place. Other cultural changes.
I was going to add to Bernard's point about kind of about cars that like having cars ubiquitously privately owned vehicles is it's like not sustainable still, because the question I've always had about electric cars is like, great, so when you're actively using them, you're not burning fossil fuels into the atmosphere. But what happens when those batteries die? They've got all these kind of resources that have been used to go into them that are just going to be thrown away, and which were kind of acquired in a not so ethical way in the first place. And I've seen things such as NL Group. I think they set up a kind of experiment where they used 90 retired Nissan Leaf batteries in kind of an off-grid kind of power storage facility. So people are looking into ways of kind of increasing the longevity of these batteries. I think JB Straubel, who's a former Tesla CTO who founded Redwood Materials, they're also trying to recycle these batteries. But at what point does it become, like, within itself, an issue where you've got all the you're still wasting materials, because the UN is aiming, I believe, or the European Union, is aiming for 75% of batteries to be recycled, I believe, which in the kind of long term is quite still a lot of waste.
Thanks, Ryan. So I've got some comments coming on the slide here, so please do keep adding in commentary and your questions coming in, and we'll try to get them as we go. I think, Christian, you've definitely...
I was just going to say, I think the e-car things, I think we all agree, but I think we all forget that as citizens, we have a lot of power in the way that we buy things. We kind of get this feeling that business, and as engineers, we all know this. We have a choice, and I think there is the hierarchy of travel, and we can, as consumers, we can choose to use public transport. We can choose to, and I think that the younger generation coming through have a different value proposition than maybe some of the older generation, where cars were perceived as status and kudos, especially in the UK. And I think that there is a cultural change happening. I see it with some of the young people I work with and some of my family members, that as that kudos and that value mechanism changes, then we will move away. But I think we all have a part to play in that as well, in the fact that, you know, as consumers, there is a choice. We can choose to use public transport.
I think you're right about choice. I found my camera. But I think as humans, the group think and the nudge and all these confirmatory by all these philosophies. Younger generation, I think I have an 18 and 20-year-old who can't afford a car, let alone somewhere to live. They're at home, that's fine. But they're forced into that, which is good. COVID showed us that we can live without cars. So I think the consumer, as a corporate body, not the individuals, but the corporate consumer is quite a weak being, quite a convenience rules. I even put something on Facebook saying, shouldn't we replace all, when we can, fences and walls with hedgerows? And people said, well, no, I've got to maintain it, and that's not convenient. So convenience is something we need to put to bed. And actually, cutting your hedgerow is cheaper than going to the gymnasium. So actually, there is a chicken and egg. No, it was a carrot and stick. Thank you.
We've got a comment here from Peter Roll in the comments. Kind of highlighting if companies need to kind of change their purpose, and there's a mention here of like B Corp certification. So how much do we think this is about consumers changing their habits, or is it more about, you know, companies taking on that responsibility, taking on a kind of a shift in the way that they approach it? And how much of this is also on the individual engineers to kind of scrutinize those projects as they come along? Is it up to us to say, hang on a moment, is that the right thing? I've got the skills and expertise. Should I be chiming in? Wendy, what are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely believe that it's, as an individual, we have to become stronger at voicing and be bolder. I think I saw that from someone else. I don't believe it's either business or the individual, and I believe that there's an awful lot around the policy and infrastructure of the structural systems around which we currently operate, particularly in the UK, which is what I can talk about, that has designed policy, whether you're looking at public transport, the infrastructure, or how you establish it, or the maintenance of your rural settings, and the importance of where SMEs sit in that. I don't think we've addressed that. So I think it needs to be the helix conversation. I think we've gone past now where it's either public sector, private sector, or the individual, or social, you know, the sort of third sector charity. I believe that collectively we all have to be at the same table now, and we have to actually all put the purpose of the planet at the top of the agenda, and then slowly work ourselves back and absolutely rip up the traditional sheet before. And I believe before engineers, certainly in the previous company I was in, which was a larger corporate, it depended who was leading the meeting, depending on which room I was in, about how much say I would have on how ethical or how environmental we could have been in our approach, which is one of the reasons why I went self-employed, because it gave me the opportunity to actually stick to my values without constantly arguing. So it meant that I got to choose the projects that I wanted to do. And I think as engineers, we're in a much stronger position now than we were 20 years ago to actually just say, we understand the science, we understand the facts, but it's about how we construct this together as a society. So I actually think it lands on everybody's door to do something about it.
And I've got a really nice comment from Leyland that's just come in. As engineers, we respond to the needs of society. Companies are in the business to meet this need. Christian, given your role at kind of that head of sustainability role, how do you tackle that?
I think, you know, I've talked about this before, and my line, I'm not going to take it, it's Duke Stump, Bucky Fuller and others have talked about this, but it's about two things really in its simplest form. What does the world most need from a company, and how is that company uniquely qualified to deliver that? That's the first two questions. At the moment, you know, the planet piece is what the world needs right now. We need all of our companies. I'm very fortunate the company I work for stood up, you know, and taken this on head on, and that's what we need to do. We need to have honesty and integrity, you know, and we talked about this before, but it's about, you know, I think going back to the SDGs, what the SDGs do or have done for industry is it gives us a playing field. It gives us a playbook that wasn't there before. And I also think that with the SDGs and the IPCC, you know, before that, with many of the kind of, we were looking at government, and now we understand, as Wendy was saying, that this purely can't be done at the government level. This has to be done at society level, across all, you know, business, down to the citizen, through NGOs, activism. Everyone has to be involved. And I think once you understand what you can do as an engineering company, for an engineering company, what the world needs from you, and understand how you're qualified to deliver that, that's a fantastic starting point.
Just want to make another point that there could be sorry to
hold on. Sorry, can I just ask if people can raise their hands on Zoom, so we're just not jumping into each other? And I'm just going to pass to Ellen, who raised their hand a little while ago. So Ellen, over to you.
Hi. So the point that was made about who is it people, or is it, you know, companies that have to sort of drive the discussion? I think that's it's actually very, very challenging, because I've worked in companies who have produced products that have been have a strong environmental positive about them, but when you put that on the shelf next to the alternative product, people didn't buy it. And that was because the value perception was different, or the cost was slightly higher, or perhaps didn't quite do the same thing that you want to do. Perhaps I think, Bernard, it was your point, you had to put a little bit more effort into the activity. So it can be very hard for companies to justify at the moment that extra, I suppose, perhaps losing some of their value perception, the amount of the market that they hold. That can be very, very difficult. And the stock market, if they're a public company, will punish them for that. So if they don't achieve a gross margin which is suitable, or what they've said they will do, their shareholder value will go down, so the company has less money, so on and so forth, even if it has tried. So we've got this, it's quite a challenging situation of everybody's got to move forward together and accept that the share, you know, perhaps company isn't going to be as profitable, and you are going to have to pay a little bit more for it, but actually for all of us it's better. So it's really hard to get that communication piece across, I think.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks so much for your contribution. And I'm just going to throw it to Peter before we kind of hand back to the panel. Go on, Peter, what would you like to add?
Just the main thing is, I think that we're in quite a powerful position, I think, as engineers, because there's far few of us in the world at the moment. And as with Wendy, a lot of us are working freelance, and so we can pick and choose quite often who we work with. And I think that in itself is quite a powerful tool that we can use to try and change things. So if we see a company that's not going to be wanting our services and we don't believe they're going to be working ethically, we can go in the other direction. So I think that's a strong thing that we need to have, and more of the work environment is going to change to that. We're not going to be in a position of working for, you know, permanent employees for companies for very much longer. That's just not going to be the way things are going to happen. So I think that really we need to sort of like vote with our feet in some cases. I also think that we need to kind of give bigger companies which are not perceived as being ethical. Let's think of something like Philip Morris acquiring the company that makes inhalers, and give them, if they're moving into an area which is maybe more ethical than their previous one, maybe that's a good thing. And maybe we should give them maybe more credence for that. Many companies have changed the businesses that they've been in. I know a company that started off being making ships and now makes EMC pads for RF purposes. So, you know, companies can change and can morph, and that could be even the bigger companies like Shell, BP. So I think that we should give them the opportunity to do that, and not just kind of beat them over the head because of their past indiscretions. And they might be in a good position to be able to implement maybe green technology, wind turbines, based on their infrastructure and their experiences. But whether they do or not is another matter.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So we've got a bit of some symmetry there with Ellen, kind of that voting and kind of voting with your feet, that kind of collective action of organizations kind of coming together and kind of deciding to do this and taking that by all doing it, then the kind of shareholder bottom line bit hopefully gets that kind of mitigated. But Bobby, given your kind of in-depth research into this kind of corporate social responsibility, what are your thoughts on this kind of conversation so far?
I think Ellen raised an important point. First of all, CSR is one of my favorite oxymorons. What I can tell you is what not to do. That voluntary initiatives do not work. They give more legitimacy to the company than to actual society. CSR is basically a win-win situation. That's all it focuses on. So you take the low-hanging fruit, and I study win-lose situations for my research. What happens when a company makes enormous value, but at the expense of certain segments of society or the environment? So was it Ellen? Ellen's point was completely spot on. About 10 years ago, one of my colleagues did a global study, and I think the book was called The Myth of the Ethical Consumer. There is no such thing. It's about less than 1% who are willing to pay more. Most 99% of consumers want the same thing as we do. Good quality, reasonable price, right? So expecting that green consumption is going to save the world is really not an answer. But those are the things which pleases companies, right? Those are the things which pleases markets. It offers a market-oriented solution and completely ignores other kinds of solutions. That's the danger for CSR, okay? Because this whole notion of doing well by doing good, that's the win-win, right? If a company can do good only to help itself do well, there is a profound limit to how much good it can do. So learning from the research, CSR is not the answer.
Can I come in there, Kerry, please? I agree entirely with the sort of vein of what's going on in the chat and what Bobby said as well. The thing that's probably more interesting in Scotland, so we have agencies, enterprise agencies, Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and the South of Scotland Enterprise sort of formed two years ago. I think it officially launched at the start of COVID sort of outbreak. They actually, through their constitution, when they became an organisation, they constituted that fair work would have to form part of their support mechanism. So they go in now and they don't support any organisations unless they're on a fair work journey. And they've had some challenges initially because some of the biggest employers in the area are also offering low value work, low value opportunities. So not necessarily within engineering as such, but as a government agency, they've come from the point of doing exactly what we're saying. Let's legislate that and make it fair work. So that's the real living wage, you know, the sort of £9.54. And I know London's got different, but the real living wage as opposed to just what the living wage is, just to avoid confusion. But they're making sure that the businesses that are going to support through this next growth are the ones. Now, we had a meeting with them last week, and they're looking at developing seagrass opportunities. They're looking at how we can take the Green Port initiative and take a disadvantage of the Brexit and what it's done with the port in the southwest of Scotland, but actually start to develop infrastructure around that supports that agenda as well. So I do agree that there has to be legislation. I'm just not sure. I always believe that the carrot is much more powerful than the stick. But the thing is, when people are not obeying, they should be punished. And I think there's lots of organisations, and I'm going to mention the likes of Brewdog, who have been doing a greenwashing thing for a number of years. And, you know, I know there's a whole load of stuff that's come out now. That was always put forward because there was impact. And that's about governments and other agencies taking those and going with them. The same with Amazon. There's ways in which those organisations can change, but again, it's about how do we use the policy tools that we've currently got to make sure that those Indigenous and current players are actually not being supported to allow the breakthrough of other organisations' ideas.
Thanks, Wendy. I think it's really, really important thing that we kind of should be discussing. But as individuals that are in the engineering community, what can we do when we're involved in these kind of projects? Sometimes we if we're kind of recent graduates, if we're not in that kind of senior leadership roles, what can we do? What kind of power can we have kind of scrutinizing the projects that we're involved in? And if there are things that we think actually this is not contributing to SDGs, this is going to have a negative impact, what what advice would you give those individuals that are trying to address it? I think that's probably more at Wendy and Christian. What would you do?
I mean, I think from my perspective, we have a number of undergraduates that work through our organisation. I always say is, you know, they have an opportunity to let us see the world through their eyes. And I think that is the most important thing, that you've got to widen your lens, got to widen your angle and start. I can't see the world through a 40-odd-year-old man's eyes. You know, it's ridiculous in the day and age we are now. I've got, you know, I kind of often use my 7-year-old as a benchmark, because it's whole world, you know, and it's the same for the undergrads. So I would say, you know, be like we've talked, Wendy's talked about it a bit, and I know Bobby, but it's about being brave and being courageous and not just falling in line with the dogma, not just falling in line with the corporate line of the organization you're in. It does courage. It does, you know, and we've all been there, but show integrity, tell, you know, do it in a polite, respectful way, but tell people your concern, or tell people that could, you know, I always love the triple bottom line as a model because it's so simple and it's a nice little framework to use for, but you know, just be honest, be integrity, be brave, and just tell the people around you that, you know, that single bottom line thing's gone. The world's changed. Always think about your customer. You know, customers are changing quickly, whether it's B2B or B2C. You know, the investor community, although it's not needed to be, is shifting. So just yeah, that's what I would say to any undergrad. Just show integrity, honest, and just be courageous if you can.
And just absolutely, and I think one of the points I've made earlier when Ellen had said something is, I'm a great believer that if we ensure people are healthy in mind, and it's actually much easier to ensure that the planet's healthy of mind, and that starts with the mental well-being of everyone in society, because we will leave people behind. There is no one in the vicinity I live in, the village I live in, who would be able to go out and buy either a brand new Tesla or a Mitsubishi or any other form of electric car, regardless of whether they've got a £5,000 or a £10,000. So how we support people to then become more stronger and look at the circular economy. So, and I think when I don't know, somebody said about the cost, one of the areas I'm working at with engineering is looking at the alternatives to peat. And currently this material that comes out of the back end of the mushroom process actually is a spent mushroom substrate, and there's 350 tons of it produced every week that currently goes nowhere, and there's no commercial revenue. I have worked quite closely with a couple of farmers and landowners to understand how they want to improve their land and their sort of carbon sequestration, what their fertilizer looks like, etc., etc. And just through having a conversations and focusing it on climate, so that they understand, what we're able to do is to make that the potash value of the spent mushroom substrate is actually greater than the potash value of the bagged fertilizer and the carbon footprint, to a factor of around about 4. So effectively, if we can find a model, a commercial economic model that will work between these two clients, I can ensure that they will actually both win. One will get a commercial revenue stream from something they've not had, and the other organisation will be able to save about £100 a tonne. Now, that can't necessarily be replicated with every single location, but this mushroom company has got 41 farms across the world. So our intention is to demonstrate it in one very, very carefully, and then use that to expand it globally. And harvest insects. Well, I mean, yeah.
And I can see, like, in the chat here, we've got some other suggestions as well. So we're involved in writing the specifications for products, add sustainability into the spec, and if it gets removed, challenge it. That's a really great suggestion there, and quite a similar one straight after. So please do keep in the chat if you've got ideas of how we can do this, how, as our role, with wherever you are in that kind of career spectrum, how can you challenge the objectives of your engineering, the work that you're involved in? And please do keep adding the examples into the chat. Now, the other thing that we wanted to talk about during the session today is how can we work towards the SDGs? Now, as engineers, with those within the engineering community, the projects we're involved in, we want to be contributing to the SDGs, and we're in the decade of action. We've got, until 2030 to really achieve these. But how do we embed them into the objectives of our projects, the work that we're involved in? How can we encourage the companies that we work for to use the SDGs and to kind of frame those objectives. Bobby, in your experience, have you seen much use of SDGs to kind of frame that in the good or the bad ways?
Yeah. All the Fortune 100 companies will have a beautiful poster of the SDGs. All the CEOs will have them on their walls, but that's about it. And also, I think there needs to be a little bit more critical awareness of some of the SDGs themselves. Since I've talked about one of my favorite oxymorons, the second favorite oxymoron is sustainable development. So if you look at I think it's SDG 3, we talk about So SDG 8, to promote sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth by pursuing a global GDP growth strategy of 3% per annum. Now, if you look at SDG 13, it says take urgent action to combat climate change. A GDP of 3% is going to increase carbon emissions. There's no magic decoupling. So you have these two complete contradictions in the same set of goals. GDP, for example, the quickest way to increase GDP is to destroy rainforests. Cut down your forest and your GDP goes up by more than 5%, right? That's how Malaysia and Indonesia had GDP growth rates of 8%. So you're going to be rewarding an activity which is going to destroy forests. That's supposed to be sustainable in some way. So the worst environmental disaster since Exxon Valdez, the BP Deepwater Horizon, the oil spill, that resulted in an increase in the GDP of the UK and the US because of all the goods and services involved to clean up that mess. So we're using these ridiculous measures to measure progress, but it's not. We're living in a GDP world. A dead tree is worth more than a living one. How that is sustainable, I have no idea.
You spoke there, Bobby, about one of the challenges with the kind of SDGs is using them, but not really using them in the correct way or actually engaging the company. So kind of having that initial thought and then letting it sit there on the shelf, have that kind of engagement throughout. Now, I know, Christian, you've done a lot of work with this in kind of your role, and that you're trying to actively using the SDGs to frame things. It'd be great to hear how you've done that, what kind of challenges you've come across.
Yeah, I appreciate what Bobby's saying about the SDGs and CEOs and what have you. I think there are companies that do have jumped on their sustainable bandwagon, but there are companies with integrity, and I think that we have to kind of give some credit to those companies that have really driven the SDGs as part of their narrative. And if you look at a company like Grundfos, Mads Nipper, who's CEO now of Ørsted, he really put the SDG at the center of their business model and really used it as a model. And Mads Nipper said to the UN, in many executive suites right now, people are talking about, American economy, blah, blah, blah. And what Mads Nipper said was, we've got to wait. We don't look for signals as leaders, we make signals. And that's why he used the SDG to make those signals in Grundfos and now in Ørsted. And in our organization, in the industry that we're in, we work across all sectors. The SDGs are a fantastic, before the SDGs, I would say sustainability, if you're not an academic or you're not a professional, it's a horrible word in the first place. And it encompasses everything. And it's really difficult to unpack that if you're not in the game or you're not in the sphere. What the SDGs allows you to do is unpack it. It allows you to focus in areas. And I think for a business, it's a good start. I'm not certainly saying it's the end result and it fixes everything. It's a fantastic start to kind of bring gaze and focus to areas where you can have impact, because you're not boiling the ocean. This is the problem we have a lot of times sustainability in industry. Trying to boil the ocean, trying to do everything at once. What it allows you to do is it allows you to focus in the areas where you can impact. You've got to understand, we haven't chosen all of the SDGs because, again, we've been boiling the ocean. What we've done is we've seen where our products can have the most impact through our customers. We can help our customers to become more sustainable. We can help our customers to save water, energy, waste. So we've picked those SDGs where we can have the most impact. From that, we've built strategy around them, not using them as focus, but using them as like a waymarker. That's the direction of travel. Then we can strategically build around them. And I think that's where they become really useful. I think you mentioned B Corp, and we talk about the traditional norms and ISOs and whatever. B Corp uses SDGs in a very proactive way, really productive way. B Corp put SDGs at the center of the way that you get marked to become approved. Now I know that you could easily go back and say, Brewdog were B Corp and how did they get away with it? But again, as a company, you have integrity. If you're going to go for something like that, and you've got to live for it, that's your responsibility. It's your corporate citizen, that's your responsibility. Same as the SDGs. So I think they are a great way to navigate your way through what can be quite a scary landscape if it's the unknown. It makes the unknown known, and I think they have a place. They're by far they're not the finished article, but they allow direction. And for big organizations, it needs to build momentum. And the SDGs is a tool of which we can do it. I do think, though, personally, we need to link ESG to SDG, because at the moment you've got two. I saw Bobby smile then. You've got the investor language, which is very different, and then you've got the SDG. How can you have the two living apart? If we're going to have real impactful investment, they have to be aligned, and we have to align them, and we have to really, like Bobby said, we have to look at them, and we have to look at them with integrity, and say, how can we honestly do what we say we're going to do using the limitations of the SDG? So I think they bring dialogue. Look at what we're having today. It's better than we were, a few years ago. Sorry, long answer.
No, that's great. Great to hear a different perspective. And I can see in the chat, in kind of response to your comment, Bobby, about GDP, there's a lot of conversation happening here about different ways to measure and different ways to measure it rather than GDP. What other mechanisms can we use? So looking at different resources. Peter's also suggested donor economics by Kate Raworth as a good place to kind of start looking at different frameworks rather than just GDP as a way of measuring that wealth and prosperity. So thanks everybody for all the different comments. I've got a couple of hands up as well. So Adnan, sorry, your hand has been up for a little while. Have you still got a question to ask?
Hello, everybody. Can you see me? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
we can hear you.
You can hear me just a minute. Okay.
Do you have a question?
Yes. My question is, as I typed in my message over there, that we all are talking about all this one green development. Last month, I believe, I saw 2 space travels. One was worse than the other. So in one commercial space travel, we emit more than 30,000 worth of, carbon, 30,000 equivalent of cars in that one travel when we launch one vehicle up. How come nobody is in our community is saying anything? Everybody's praising, oh yes, we have gone into this space, we have done it. That's the question here.
I wonder if it's a coincidence. Tells a lot about what these people think about the future of the planet, if there is one. Is it a coincidence that the 3 richest men in the world are all looking at outer space? They've probably given up on the planet. They're all looking for how do we base ourselves out of space. Why is that?
Anybody have any thoughts on why that is? I think it's a really important point you've raised there, Bobby, of the individuals that are interested and their kind of net worth and kind of that distribution of wealth is a real issue. It's one of those issues that is definitely, as part of this conversation, kind of really assessing and analysing how the engineering that we're involved in is kind of contributing to that human development and making sure that everybody is kind of meeting the needs of human development. It's something that's kind of unpacked in Kate Ross done economics, the lack and that some individuals still don't have those kind of basic human needs met, yet we're kind of really overshooting where we need to be in those planetary boundaries. So there's just a real disconnect by the way we're using resources, but also not meeting the needs of so many people. Peter, you've also got your hand up. Have you got an additional point?
It's really something you just echoed there, and going back to the donut economics, and I think that it's the way that the whole of the economy of the global economy is measured is really deceptive, and I believe that if that is reassessed, and that if we start to work towards, as I say, having policies, as Wendy was saying earlier, that actually guide us in the right direction, guide the whole of industry in the right direction, then we can maybe be in a better place and have more fulfilling lives. I think that one of the things I was particularly interested in coming in on this discussion was when you look at the things that motivate people, they say it's, particularly in engineering, it's mastery, using the skills that we've given, autonomy, given the freedom to do what we need to do. And the other one is purpose. And I think that all of us want to work for something that has real, true purpose that we believe in. That doesn't mean that it cannot be profitable, but I think that really what we want to do is see something that changes lives, that makes a difference. That's the reason we do what we do. It's a vocation. It's not just another job. And I think that we need to kind of push that out there and really kind of assess every day what we're doing and if it's the right thing. And as I say, I think that there is, I think GDP is just defunct. I don't think anybody reasonably thinks that's a way of measuring wealth or prosperity these days. But those measures need to be changed by governments ultimately, and by international organisations, I think, to make sure that we can look at things in a better way. And I think donut economics kind of points us in the right direction, though it might not have all the answers.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the contribution. And I saw Wendy's hand wave there. Go on.
Yeah, just very quickly, I just saw what Ellen put in there, and that was about what I was going to jump in and say about the visibility of those who are travelling to space. There is as much visibility and within the sort of arena I work in, but again, that's because I'm perhaps in a more privileged position that I'm able to choose the clients I want to work with now, and then the rooms in which I work. But the case studies and the opportunities to showcase that economic modelling is not drip feeding down. So I work predominantly in the Hunter Centre with master's students, international master's students, very clever people, multidisciplinary. The vast majority of them wanting to make a difference, and a lot of them engineers doing sort of additional MBAs or MScs to supplement their engineering degree. The challenges that we have is that we don't have economic modelling yet within our universities or our academic structures that supports that in a much more open, transparent way. They are still, when they're doing their analysis and their dissertations and their projects, for them to be able to demonstrate their business acumen and how they take that forward, they're having to look at listed companies and large corporations, because that's where the accounts are actually visible. That's where the information is accessible. And what I had to do was I'm a member of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. That's Catherine Trebek, so very much around that sort of whole donut economic field as well, if you like, that arena. And through that organisation, I managed to get some case studies from the Stockholm Institute. I can't remember what their full title is, but it was basically rummaging around quite in depth to actually get economic models that I could share with my students, which then allowed them to start looking at those UN 70 Sustainable Development Goals. So I think we're all moving and on a journey, and I think sometimes we need to stop being so hard. But I think when we do find the case studies, let's shout about them a bit more. But like why, we all know we want space, but not all of us have got these environmental projects. So let's try and give them the platform, or encourage the people who are in that more media front facing to take those projects and explain them in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I've done some work. Cambridge Institute, fantastic work around rewiring economy, but it's with the Cambridge Institute. And, I think, we've seen the SDG donut model with the economic model. I think Oxfam did a brilliant model, economic model, with a link to the SDGs, but where is it? They're locked up. We need to get this information out there. But I think we've got a couple of things that I'm picking up on. Some of the points is, everyone's got solutions. Like the solutions in this room, the solutions are in this virtual room. Everybody on this has said something that actually puts us to where we need to go. And I think when we talk about our role as engineers in sustainability, my job is, like everyone, you see the solution, but actually it's the transition to the solution. So we need to be focusing. And I think what we need to do is sometimes say, yeah, we understand the solution, but as engineers, everyone on this call, everyone can make an impact by saying, I have a solution, I believe in the solution, and then helping through the transition. Especially as engineers, it's about putting your arm around people, telling them it's all right, and just being curious as engineers. That's central to our being, is being curious. Obviously, sometimes we have to accept the unknown. Okay, I know that sometimes as engineers we like to have everything into 10 significant figures, and we like Excel spreadsheets. But no, in this area, it's fine to say I don't have the answers. I don't know the reference. I don't know the direction, but I can help with the transition. So I think that what I'm picking up is, I'm hearing some wonderful things. It's about, we're all guilty of like living in this and believing in it and being passionate about it and seeing the solution. And I think there's been a lot of frustration for a number of years and anger, but from perspective, I'm an optimist, because if you're not going to be an optimist in this sphere, then what are you going to be? You'll fail. There's a fantastic paper, Sell the Sizzle, which is from the Manchester University. And what they say is, if you sell hell, we'll go to hell. The great marketing piece. How do you sell sausages? You don't sell a sausage, you sell the sizzle. They call the paper Sell the Sizzle. And I feel everyone's got something to say, something constructive. Sell the sizzle. Go and tell people your brilliant ideas. Go and tell people, how we're going to transition. Be part of it. Don't feel that there's an organization, because we get this a lot, it's always been over there. The corporate hippie is over there somewhere dealing with this. No. It's in the room. It's right now. We're the solution. Go and be the solution. There's a big difference between the solution and the answer. What I would say to all of my teams is, set the unknown and be curious, and you'll find the solution. Maybe not the answer, but you'll find the solution.
Thanks, Christian. That's inspiration. Now I've got Vivian has had their hand up for a little while, so I'm just going to throw to Vivian for their comment or question.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand again. It was in relation to something that's been said earlier about how responsibility should truly be at the heart of engineering, and that we should sort of choose to work for purposeful things and towards working for providing people with like their actual needs. And I think that's something that maybe in more of the public in the public eye, that is not always the job of an engineer. So I'm going on to second year now, so I'm fairly early on in my career. But when I told people I wanted to be an engineer, they were like, "Oh, she's very sciencey, and she's probably very much she wants to sit behind a computer all day and do math stuff and make a lot of money from it." And I think it's quite easy in that context for most people who haven't spoken to like in more detail to actually see how choosing to be an engineer can also be something that really from a point of responsibility. And I think I just like to reiterate that point.
Thank you. Thanks for the comment there. And Elizabeth, you put your hand up whilst Christian was speaking. Do you have something to add or a question for Christian?
I do have a question, but it was circling around a lot of the discussion that we've had. As Wendy was talking there, she was saying that she sort of, I'm paraphrasing, so apologies, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that you sort of had a responsibility to make purposeful choices, to use the word of the day, and you were doing that in your clients and your decisions, etc. And what you did when you were talking about that, Wendy, was that you acknowledged your privilege, that you have the privilege of being able to make those choices. And when we were talking earlier about, you know, making sustainable choices in the businesses that you work for, customers, that comes from a place of privilege, that you even have that choice. And I put in the chat earlier around when we were discussing sort of alternatives as needing more effort or time or money, that again comes from a place of privilege, where we might have more time, money, or effort to give. And I think when we've been discussing a lot of things, we've been talking about sustainability, but we haven't been talking about equity or equality. And I think if we're discussing, we sort of, all the panelists gave their idea of their purpose at the beginning. And I think it would be interesting to know if any of your purposes did actively, I know they will, but your idea of sort of equity and your role about making equitable sustainability, because we very much are at risk, I think, of leaving a lot of people behind.
Great, and absolutely 100% agree, Elizabeth, that is the privileged position that we are in, also from the education point of view, which then gives you the opportunity to have a platform to say that. So the development that I first mentioned, which was about the eco-wellness, they are looking at this being a very high-end, working on natural capital, using, in fact, it's ex-coal field. There's an adjacent wood chip factory, so we want to access the geothermal energy, to use the geothermal energy. And we'll use their steam to create geothermal energy, to create renewable energy, which will then allow them to have their energy for free. We can then use some of the proportion of that energy to crack hydrogen, to use that in hydrogen treatment. So there's very much a circularity around the natural capital. We're looking at heat pumps and various others. So that's the climate bit. The people bit is that very much when I started the conversation with them, because they want, whilst I'm involved in the engineering part of it, I am actually there to develop the business model as opposed to actually doing the engineering. But one of the factors we said at is the client base are going to be people who can afford to pay 200, 300, 400, 500 pounds a night or a weekend or whatever. But it's going to be slap bang in an area where the Scottish Index of multiple deprivation, something ridiculous like 20% of the people in that area. So what we're trying to do is to look at three customer bases. One, which is very much the paying customer who are going, the privileged few who can access this, who are willing to pay the money. The other one is the private health, because that's where the founders, that's where their background is in global renewal, global insurance. So I'm not familiar with that market. And the one that they've asked me to look at is that community service. So I'm currently working and hopefully doing some sort of roundtable discussions around social prescribing, around making sure that all of the activities that we will be providing, all of the services that we'll be able to provide at that infrastructure that we're developing will actually support the 3,000 people in the immediate village. And they will have access to training, to the treatment and supporting a social prescribing, because there's also a high suicide rate amongst young men in that area. So it's about how we start to tackle what the societal areas are and how we can combine that in the services we offer and actually deliver some of the services, specifically because that's the target audience that are in the area as well. But as the area, it's the East Ayrshire Council, and one of the highest employers are also the NHS. So it's public sector NHS. So we're looking at how we can start to support that through both training the NHS, giving support to the NHS, and also as part of the long COVID recovery and how we can start to be a solution for that as well. So that was very much part of my pitch to both the investor and the people, that if we're going to provide something that's a luxury high-end development, which will provide 300 or 400 high-value jobs, which is great, that's tick. How do we make sure that we don't leave those people behind in that area and we start to make sure that they're in there? And again, right now, currently, we don't have planning permission, we don't have anything, the investor's still funding it, but these are the comments that I made to them as part of me taking on that position. So I think it's very important that we're bold up front and make it a solution, because as engineers, that's what we're really good at, finding a solution and then taking it and running with it.
I think the point you raised about equity, again, is a crucial one. I think that's one of the SDG goals. But there is a deep, deep hypocrisy in the West when it comes to sustainable development and climate change. The problem is not climate change. The problem is climate injustice. The people who are dying by their millions are the people who contributed the least to the problem, right? That is the fundamental problem of climate change. And when I say it's the deep hypocrisy of the West, it's easy to blame China and India as the biggest polluters. We have outsourced our pollution to them. Who buys that shit? We want cheap stuff. We send it there. They pollute to give us cheap stuff, and then we blame them, and we get the cheap stuff, right? That's the fundamental problem. So the people who are going to suffer the most from these climate change solutions are the people who are going to be the poorest and the most vulnerable. Well, we are going to be okay, right? Because we have the resources to deal with climate change. And that's one of the fundamental problems. The atmosphere has been used unequally for the past 300 years, right? So what is needed is climate justice, not climate change.
Thanks both. Thanks, Wendy and Bobby. And thanks, Elizabeth, for that fantastic question. I can see a lot of additions in the chat there and a lots of nodding happening with both of those answers. So thanks, Wendy, for providing some tangible solutions, some tangible examples of how to actually start to incorporate that. And Bobby, for reminding us exactly why we need to consider this, exactly why these challenges exist. And that kind of injustice that we're currently facing are absolutely the injustices that as engineers we need to be considering and kind of embedding into our projects. Now I can see there's lots of, go on, Christian. Go
Just
on.
one point, no, because I agree, but I just think, again, I think sometimes when we talk about sustainability and the model of sustainability, it's about compound, it's about compound interest. It's like, if you're a company of one or a bigger corporation, the idea is, and this is the ripple effect, is you get a chance to influence your supply chain. And I know that there will be those that abuse it, but I think, I work for an organization that's responsible on this front. We look at our scope 3 emissions as well as our scope 1, scope 2. And it's about being a neighbor of choice. I think as a business, I think if you think about your business, your product reflects your company values. And I think that we're at a place now, we're in a zeitgeist. COVID certainly amplified that zeitgeist around race, gender, whole manner of things that we're looking at, the environment, social injustice, climate injustice. I think if you think about the conversations we were having a year ago, we're having the whole narrative has changed. So I think, and I think that now, like Bobby was saying, the UK lost an opportunity around the air travel. Actually, we've got an opportunity that we must make sure we don't lose right now, and that is that we take this zeitgeist that we're in at the moment, whether it's inequality of either race or climate, and we do something about it. And as engineers, as a community, we've talked about this as not being a job; it's more than a job. We can influence. I don't this idea that we can influence. We can influence. I've seen it. I've done it. So we really must use that. We must seize this moment, because if we don't, we're going to lose it. And we're now at a point where urgency is gone. If we lose it now, it's lost. It's that vital that we kind of stand up, show that.
Thanks, Christian. And I can see a comment coming here from Elizabeth again about that need to innovate and drive change, and we need to, as you say, urgency is absolutely come and gone. We are now very much in the heart of it, and we need the solutions. We need to make these changes. Now I'm very aware of the time. We're kind of coming up to the end of our time together, and fantastic conversations kind of happening. And as Christian kind of rightly said, the ideas, those kind of inspiration, the solution, that bank of knowledge is very much in this room, and we don't want to lose it behind as we kind of leave this conversation. So I just want to take a moment now. If you've got something else you want to add, something else you want to explore, please use the chat now to make sure we pick it up in our last kind of final moments. But to the panel, we're talking about being purposeful, and those kind of changes, those shifts we can make as individuals. And we're talking about that consideration that we need to have on our impact of the work that we're involved in, being able to scrutinize and challenge the work that we're involved in, and kind of consider those impacts. If you could boil it down to kind of one main takeaway that you'd want participants of the call today to have, what would you like someone to walk away from today? What kind of a thing would you encourage them to do as a next step if they want to start embedding this principle into their day-to-day actions? There's a big question.
Yeah, I would say for me, ideas change everything. It's as simple as that. The ideas change everything, and you know, big ideas, brave ideas. You know, small budgets need brave ideas, as somebody once said, and don't give up on your ideas. You know, because it's if you think about everything somewhere started with an idea, everything. So if you have an idea, then believe in yourself and believe in your idea and take it with you. That's all I would say.
Thanks, Christian. Wendy, your final thoughts?
I think it's been said a couple of times. I think be curious, always be bold as often as you can, and start every conversation with someone about a more grassroots level, whether it's a client, whether it's your neighbour, whatever it is, and actually hold the conversation with the UN 17 Sustainable Goals as the point of context and the elastic bit that we always bounce back to. Whereas you and I think what Christian said about scope 3 is crucial, because it's the scope 3 emissions where we can start to make some big changes quickly.
You know, the fact that there were 80 plus people in this room shows obviously as individuals there's a lot of interest, a lot of passion. People want to change things, which is great. The problem is when we move to the corporate level, which is where I come, which is what my research is, then it becomes a challenge. So my takeaway would be people to start thinking about is move away from a discourse of responsibility to a discourse of accountability. Because if you follow the responsibility logic to its logical extreme, we end up with a corporation who's responsible for everything and accountable for nothing. So you move it to account. What does accountability mean? It means checks and balances. It means enforceability. It means answerability. It means punishment at one level. So the responsibility is nice, it's very fuzzy, but it doesn't really do much. So let's start thinking about what accountability means for both ourselves as individuals and for our corporations.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Wendy. And I can see we've got one more final hand up. Mariam, have you got a comment or a question?
Hi everyone. It's a common, final thought, final comment I have. I hope you can all hear me clearly. I'm unable to have my camera on. But the final thought is really in regards to one of the comments that were made about the need for climate justice. And I couldn't agree with that, anymore. I mean, I totally agree with the urgency for climate justice. We all share the same atmosphere, but the way it's been used is not equal. And the people that are suffering from it are the people that are causing less pollution. So that's my key takeaway, I will say. And then I'm also going to add that it's really good to see how more and more people are taking this issue of sustainability and climate change very seriously. As Bobby pointed, we had 80 people in the call today, and we're seeing a lot of work being done at corporate level, at university level, and it's just becoming increasingly popular. These big ideas of global responsibility, sustainability, which were once just academic discussion, are being put into practice today, which is very good to see. What I'm going to say about that as well is that as much as we are able to have this intellectual, academic discussion about sustainability in essence is very simple to apply. Sometimes, we make it very complex in terms of, we overcomplicate it, but it's very simple in essence. And I feel that sometimes, this very intellectual or corporate discussion is not always filtered down to the layman level. So I'm going to finish with a very good example that I saw over the summer. I went to the beach, and then when I was at the beach, I realized how much plastic toys were being sold at the beach to start off with. We're talking about, plastic sand buckets, toys wrapped in plastic nets. And then when you're at the beach, when the tide starts to come up, you see people rushing back. And usually a lot of these plastic toys are left there, and then they end up getting washed away into the sea. And we know what happened when all these plastic nets and things are washed into the sea. And nowhere do we see any sign in the beach saying that, people should pick up, their plastic rubbish, or basically making people aware of the danger, because we're talking about danger here, aware of the danger of these plastic toys to the animals. So I feel that, as much as a lot of work is being done at an institutional level, we still have more work to do in diluting these major concepts into very simple terms that can be understood and applied by the layman. Because at the end of the day, sustainability is very simple in essence, and it's just common sense. So that's my last point on that. And thanks for giving me the mic.
Thanks, Mariam. Thank you very much. And I can see some more comments and thoughts coming in on the chat. Now, of course, we never want to leave these conversations. We always kind of want to keep going and keep discussing. But as kind of been pointing out throughout the whole of the conversation, it's more about, yes, coming here, being inspired, having these kind of moments where we can regroup and get ideas, but also we need to go and take action. We need to go and start embedding this into them. We heard lots of different examples over the course of the session today, giving us some ways to kind of put this into practice. So I'd really encourage everybody to digest and take some time to digest and kind of share how you are putting this into practice. Now, as Christian and Wendy and Bobby have all pointed out, there's lots of ideas on this call. There's lots of amazing conversations happening on the chat as well as we go, and we don't want to kind of stop it here. So one of the things that we want to encourage after all of these sessions is to continue the conversation. We've set up a Slack space for members of Engineers Without Borders UK. You can join that and kind of pick up the conversation, keep sharing ideas, keep sharing those kind of case studies that you come to. As Wendy said, like when you find them, share them. And kind of one final thought from me is this is not an easy task. Reaching that tipping point where global responsibility is embedded into engineering is not going to be an easy thing to do. But as a movement of people, as a people that are inspired and wanting to do this, we are a powerful force. We can kind of reach that tipping point. It's through our collective action. It's through the kind of actions that we're making already that's getting this on the radar, that's making this as important as it needs to be at individual levels, but also organizational levels. So together, through the actions of members of Engineers Without Borders UK, whether that be small, whether that be large, we are putting global responsibility into the heart of engineering. And thank you to everybody for sharing their ideas, their thoughts, their challenges. And I'm really looking forward to picking up this conversation in our next event in about 6 weeks' time. But thank you to our panelists. Thanks to Bobby, Christian, and Wendy for giving up your evening, sharing your thoughts and ideas. And thank you to everybody on the call that's contributed to discussion. Fantastic time. And we'll be sharing the recording as soon as we can. So thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.